read. We are surrounded by books. And being a great reader, a good reader, is so important to the way we conduct our lives. My father was also a scholar. He studied Belief for 15 years. He got Belief. So I was raised in a home where that was part of what we did. When I was 20, I don't want you to do too much counting. I'm not giving you years. I am 22 as far as I'm looking now. Okay? When I was 20, I started teaching high school English. I taught for 15 years. Don't do the math. I taught for 15 years. I'm married. I got married when I was 23. I'm married. I have 4 children. My husband is a rabbi at the Spanish Portuguese Synagogue in Manhattan, 70th and Central Park West. Come and visit us. We love having you. Come over. We moved to Manhattan last September. When I started teaching, I realized that my master's in American literature wasn't enough, so I went back to Columbia and I got a second master's in English education. So my master's is in teaching and my first is in literary analysis. In the past 5 years, I stopped teaching in high schools and I started doing educational and curriculum development. And I teach adult education. Well, I teach many adults, but also many young adults. I teach Torah classes 3-4 times a week. And I also give many book clubs. It sounds like a weird job, but it's something I do. I give book clubs. That's me. I'm so excited to meet all of you. I've heard a lot about your community for many, many years. I've never been here before. I've never met any of you. We'll look very similar, so I'm excited. Okay? And I also love that it was called 10:30 was starting now, because also, that's what I'm used to. If I called something for 10:30, we don't stop for that. Like, that's the way we work. People get annoyed. You said to be here at 10:30. I'm like, no, I meant 11:15. Why are you here? But I know you are. You're the same. You're the same. All right. So today we're going to be talking about Hannuka. And what we're going to try to do together is to understand a little bit about what the holiday of Hannuka is all about. What are we supposed to be understanding about ourselves and about ourselves as Jews and ourselves individually also during the 8 days of Hannuka. We're going to start by I'm going to ask you to answer this question. You're going to turn to the person sitting next to you. You're going to try to answer it together. And the question is, why do we celebrate Hannuka? Question, right? Why? Why do we have this holiday called Hannuka? Turn to the person sitting next to you and come with an answer. Don't be embarrassed.
Is she putting one by one, or is she asking?
Okay. Talk to me about your answers a little bit. And by raising hands, how many people, the first thing that you said was because there was a miracle and the oil lasted for 8 days. So many of us have grown up learning the reason that we celebrate Hannuka is because a long time ago, we're not sure when, right? If I ask you, you ready for this? Don't be embarrassed. When did Hannuka happen? Good. You said you know nothing before. Like, what am I going to teach? Most people, if you ask them when did Hannuka happen, cannot tell you. It happened. There were Greeks, okay? There was something going on with the Greeks and the Jews. And the Greeks were making it very difficult for the Jews to live their lives as Jews. They were oppressing them. They defiled the temple, the Bet Mikdash. They defiled the temple. And when the Hashmonaim, right, this family, came and defeated the Greeks, they went into the Bet Mikdash and they wanted to light the candles, but there was no pure oil. There was no Shemen Zayitza, but they found one little pot of oil, and miraculously it lasted 3 days, and that's why we light candles for 8 months. Does anybody have a different answer than that? Yes.
I know that the Maccabees
their conversations talk about the fact that there was a war. Yes? Okay? So not as many, but some of us know that this holiday is actually about a war. And that this war was about the very few people against a great army, right? This large empire, the Greek Empire, right? Very few, a small family of Jews able to defeat this large army. And when they defeated them, able to revert the land back to being in Jewish hands, right? That second interpretation, interestingly, has gotten a bit lost along the way. We're going to talk a little bit about why, when I ask about Hannuka, usually people tell me something about oil, even though the main miracle of Hannuka is not about miraculous oil, but about a miraculous battle. And a miraculous battle is the ability of very few Jews to defeat a very big army. And around the year 1948, 1950, Jewish learning about Hannuka started to change. And even though maybe the previous generations had only learned about oil, people started learning about the battle again, about the importance of this small group of people able to do battle. Do you want to take a guess as to why it might be that around those years, things started to change? People started to talk about the battle. You against the many. This is when the state of Israel was established, right? The idea of a Maccabee, right? And a strong Jewish soldier was sort of, the dust was taken off of it, and remember when we were once very small people and we were able to defeat the empire. Yeah? So this has become more popular, but still not commonly known. So let's start with some basics. Look at the bottom of this first. You see this sheet? Look at the very bottom at the timeline. You only got one sheet? Share. You don't have to share with me here. Okay. So this just gives you, we're not going to do this for very long, I just want you to know where we're at. It gives you a very general timeline of Jewish history. Okay? So in around 1000 BCE, before the Common Era, we have the kingdom of King David. When is the destruction of the first temple? It says 587. I don't know why it says that. They date is really 586. Okay? In 586, before the Common Era. So we're going to go with like the birth of Jesus, of Christianity. Okay? That's your 0 point in your brains. We're in 2014. Take yourself to 0. 580 years before that, our first temple was destroyed. Okay? And we went into Galut Babel. We went into Persian rule. We went into Persian exile. So you see where it says 539 BCE and 516 the second temple is built? So after the second temple, they went back to Israel and they were able to rebuild the temple about 70 years later. In this area right here, 500s, 516, that's when the story of Purim happens. The story of Purim is happening 500 years before the 0 mark. Hannuka is very different. You're going to fast forward, okay? The Greeks are going to come into the land of Israel in the year 300, around 332, Alexander the Great. And when he dies, the kingdom splits. There's the Ptolemies and the Seleucids. You don't need to know about that. But the Maccabees are all the way over here, 164 BC. So now when somebody asks you about Hannuka, you're like, by the way, I totally know when this happened. It happened in about 164 BCE during the Greek rule. All right? So 164 is the time that they rededicate the temple. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of that information. So here's the next question. So now we're saying, the holiday has something to do with light that lasts. It has something to do with light. It has something to do with an extraordinary battle, the battle of the weak against the strong. Yeah. So I have two other questions for you, which you might or might not know the answer to. Why is the holiday 8 days long? And why does it start on Chafei Kislev, right? That's the 25th of Kislev. Again, hard question. Turn to each other, see if you can figure out an answer. Why is it 8 days long? Why does it start on the 25th of Kislev? I'm not expecting a lot of you to have great answers. Just do whatever you can. Talk to each other.
That's the time that my colleagues might be and try to
And you can answer that, why is it called Hannuka?
or what is it called?
All right, let's hear. Anybody want to put themselves on? You're going to get recorded. Who wants to? So, one answer. Wait, so sometimes when I ask people, why is it called Hannuka? They say, Ki Hanu b'chapeh. They rested on the 25th. Hanu b'chapeh. That was the day that the battle ended, and they entered the temple. It's not the reason, okay? That's not why it's called Hanukah. I just want to clarify that today. The reason is because the word Hanukah means something. It means, we use the word when we say if you ever have a Chanukat habayit, okay? That's what the word is from, the word Chanukat habayit. It's a dedication or a rededication. When you move into a new home, many people sometimes throw a party, and they say we're having a Chanukat habayit, okay? It means we want everybody to come see, we finished our house, look at our nice marble furniture, whatever, right? It's pretty. And they invite you to see this beautiful rededicated place. In the Torah, when we first have the Mishkan, and we do a Hanukah, right? We do a dedication of the temple, it lasted for 8 days. And temple dedications usually lasted for 8 days. Just notice that. Okay. You're going to learn a lot of stuff today that you might not have heard before, but it's all interesting, it's all okay. So one thing is, so yes, the reason why it's called Hanukah is because this is about Hanukat habayit. This is about the rededication of the Beit Mikdash. We went back into the temple and we rededicated, cleaned it, became pure once again. Hanukkah. Why on the 25th of Kislev? And why 8 days? Any others? Yeah?
Because maybe that time it was the time of the calendar. They have the Jewish calendar that time on Shul, and it was 25th of Kislev.
So the obvious answer is, well, that's when it happened, right? It was on the 25th of Kislev because that's when it happened.
What happened?
I'm going to tell you different. Anybody have it? And why 8 days? Because the light lasted 8 days, right? That's, I mean, it's nice, but it's not true. Okay. So it's not that it's not true. It's that interesting. Hanukkah is a very complicated holiday, and it is layered with a lot of different pieces. I'm going to teach you a few of them. One of them is this date, Chaf Hei Kislev, has a lot of different meanings to it. The 25th of Kislev. It happens to be, on your sheet, you're going to see it, okay? Look at it. You see on your sheet where it says Haggai, okay? I'm going to read you this quote. Haggai is a prophet writing during the dedication of the Second Temple, okay? He's talking about when they did 516, when they come back 70 years later, they're going to build the Second Temple. He says this. Consider, I pray, from this day and forward, from the 4th and 20th day of the 9th month, even from that day, the foundation of Hashem's temple was laid. Consider it. So we find out from Haggai that in fact, the Second Temple, when they're building the Second Temple, what date do they choose to build it on? He says he's in from the 24th on. The 25th was the day that they laid the first stone. When the Greeks came and they wanted to destroy the Jewish spirit, they said, you know what day we are going to defile and destroy your temple? 25th of Kislev, the same day that you founded it. And when the Maccabim and the Hashmonaim came and they cleansed the temple, they said, you know what day we're going to rededicate it? The same day it was founded and the same day that you tried to destroy us. And they chose that day for that symbolic reason. Okay? Because that's the day that it was originally founded. And here's another interesting thing. Did you notice that everybody around us, not Jews, are lighting candles all over the place? Yes. I just drove down Fifth Avenue the other night, and it's completely lit up. There are lights everywhere, okay? We are about to enter the winter solstice. The winter solstice is when the days reach their shortest points. And when the days reach their shortest points, we understand that maybe there was a concept out there that when the days start to get very short, in order to lift people's spirits, we would start lighting candles. The rabbis knew this. Look at the first source. Okay, see the first source? This is a little bit more complicated to see. Said Rabbi Hanan bar Rabbah, calendar is kept on the 8 days following the winter equinox, Saturnalia on the 8 days preceding the equinox. So what they're saying is, from 8 days before the equinox and 8 days afterward, the pagans used to have a holiday. Okay? As a mnemonic, take the verse that has beset me behind and before. So they said they would have. It doesn't say it here, but these holidays were actually, they were not our kind of holidays. Okay? They were rowdy. Everybody would get drunk. They would do, they would have their crazy pagan rituals that they would do, and the rabbis felt very oppressed by this. Look at the next part of it. When primitive Adam, and when they're talking about primitive Adam, they're talking about Adam Harishon, the first man ever created, okay? Here he is, God just created him, he's sitting in the world, and the year is passing by. So when the primitive Adam saw that the day was gradually getting shorter, he said, woe is me. Perhaps because I have sinned, the world around me is being darkened and returning to its state of chaos and confusion. This then is the kind of death to which I have been sentenced from God. So what does Adam Rishon think? Here he is, he's in, right? He committed his sin, and he was kicked out of Gan Eden, and the days are getting shorter and shorter, and it's getting darker and darker. And he's the first man, nobody has experienced time before. And in his mind, he's wondering, is this the end of everything? Is it just going to keep getting darker and darker and darker? Yeah? Until it goes back to original chaos, right? Tovo, choshech apanim tehom, there was darkness on the face of the land. But, so he began keeping an 8 days fast. So he started keeping 8 days. But as he observed the winter equinox and noted the day getting increasingly longer, he said, this is the world's course. He said, this is nature. And he set forth to keep an 8 days festivity. In the following year, he appointed both as festivals. Now he fixed them for the sake of heaven, but the heathens appointed them for the sake of idolatry. So they say, very originally, when human beings were experiencing time, this time of year was the darkest time of year for them. Literally, but also figuratively. Does anybody experience this? Does anybody get the winter blues?
Yeah, all the time.
I feel like, where's Florida? And why do they get so much sun? My sister-in-law's from Venezuela. She's like, it's always 75 degrees and beautiful. I'm like, yes, I'm so excited for you. That's abundantly with my star. But the truth is, in December, coming in, and the day is not, there's something, your heart contracts a little bit. You can't help it. Human beings, our heart contracts a little bit. And you have to, so they're imagining, Adam Rishon going through this, the first man is saying, what's going to be? And then as the days start getting longer, there's like a certain joy that comes with that. Oh, it means it's going to be okay. The days are going to get longer. And so there was a very ancient tradition of lighting candles during dark days. Yeah? That was a very, very, very ancient tradition. So the rabbis understood this, but they say something very interesting. They say, he fixed them for the sake of heaven, but they appointed it for the sake of idolatry. You're going to think I'm switching gears, but I want to tell you something really interesting. Why do we spin dreidels? Does anybody do spin dreidels? Why do we spin dreidels on Hanukkah? Why?
Because the world turns around.
And this turning of fate. Beautiful.
No, not
Oh, I was like, wow, that's amazing. I never heard that. Just brilliant. Yeah, oh, because the world turns around. Oh, that's even better. By the way, it's not bad. Yeah.
When the Greeks came and basically didn't let them do any other, custom because they let them be Jewish. When the Greeks came, she said, "What are you doing?" He said, "No, we're just going to do it."
So we have this thing, right? When the Greeks came, and the Jews, they had tunnels with, they were praying. They would be praying. But when the Greeks would come into the cave, not the tunnel, the cave. When they came into the cave, they would quickly put their sidurim down. They would stop praying, and they would say, "No, we're spinning dreidels. We're spinning dreidels." Okay.
Similarly with Mashadi,
What?
Similarly with Mashadi, that's how they had their grace created when they came to the Lord.
We're not doing anything. Jews in general have mastered the art, okay, of hiding our identity. And I could do a whole class about how many Jews have hidden their identity in order to save Jewish people, which is part of this class, but we're not going to do it right now. But the fact of the matter is, again, I'm not here to destroy things, I just want to show you something interesting. The word dreidel is a German word, okay? In Germany, there was a famous gambling game called Dreidel, and they would have a nichts, which means you lose everything, and it's like they would have certain words that parallel our Samacheshit, but for them it meant to take half the pot, you take the whole pot in German. Okay. Yes. So, and here's it's interesting because I can give you a proof. Mother Teresa, okay, this is a quote from Mother Teresa. She's not Jewish. Maybe she's Jewish. Who knows? Anyway, this is Mother Teresa quote. It happens to be a beautiful quote, so I'm going to read it to you anyway. But it goes to your answer, by the way. Heroes are those who do their duty in the daily grind of domestic affairs, while the world whirls as a maddening dreidel. So why is Mother Teresa saying, why is she talking about dreidels, okay? Because dreidels were something that everybody used. So how did Jews start spinning dreidels on their holiday? Question mark, exclamation point, yeah? Here's what's really interesting about Hanukkah. Everybody talks about Hanukkah as being the holiday where we talk about the dangers of assimilation, right? The dangers of an outside society coming and changing us and affecting us and causing us to lose ourselves. What we're seeing while we're talking, though, is that inside of our holiday are pieces of other cultures and other religions, right? So we have this old pagan holiday where we used to light lights, the winter solstice holiday that everybody had. And we have a dreidel here, and we have different little pieces that don't seem to be native to our original Jewish festival, right? And this is where I like to talk about the difference between assimilation and appropriation, okay? For many people, assimilation is when you lose yourself, you lose your identity, and you completely blend in to the larger society around you. Yes? You are no longer yourself. You've been absorbed by another culture and another society. Appropriation is the opposite. Appropriation is where you feel so good and so strong and so excited about yourself that you're completely unafraid of the outside world. And not only that, you feel very comfortable appropriating pieces of it, right? You take pieces of the outside world and you make it Jewish, right? You turn it on its head. So the rabbis had no problem taking a dreidel, a German gambling game, right? And taking the same letters, which in German mean you take half the pot, you take the whole pot. And they said, no, that's not what it means. It means Nes Gadol Haya Sham. A great miracle was once there, right? They take something completely external. All the people around them love gambling with dreidels. I love gambling with dreidels. We use Visit. I don't know what you use. Do you know Visit? Pumpkin seeds? Anyway. Right? Or chocolate, my other favorite food in the world. So yes, it's very fun. So everybody was enjoying it. They said, I see that you enjoy this gambling game. right? We see that you like playing with the dreidel. Let me show you how it can be part of your Judaism. Let me show you how this is not something that we have to be afraid of, but something we can appropriate. Does anybody have a question about this? Yeah?
Isn't it like kind of in a way overpower the things that we have been doing? Like change this shifts the gifts and dreidel, it kind of shifts you into the larger picture of Hannuka or the larger message.
I think that we have to be very careful not to get lost, right? Not to get too lost. And that's why we have a class like this, to remember the roots of our holiday, to remember what it's all about, right? Like the giving of gifts was never part of what we originally did, but now we do that, right? And I think it's okay because if you've ever seen a kid get a gift, they're really, really happy and it makes them enjoy their holiday. But we should always know our history, and we should know where we come from, yeah? So for example, are you bored? We appropriated, yes, we appropriated the gifts also. But what I'm trying to say is, I don't know if it's such a bad thing. I think that the only time that you're able to appropriate things is when you love yourself, right? I think about this a lot when people talk about how we're supposed to interact with the outside world, yeah? And I think if we would start teaching our kids how to love their Jewish identities, right? To love their Judaism, and to not be afraid, because whatever they see and that they think is amazing and beautiful, we will show them how, in fact, there is a source for it in Judaism, there's a place for it, if they really think it's so amazing, or how it's a contradiction, and how it's not part of what we're doing, it's not part of who we are, right? But we should never let them think that the choice has to be assimilation, which means, to assimilate means you say, I don't love myself, I don't value myself, I don't value my religion, I don't value what I was raised to be, right? One of them says, I so love myself that I'm afraid of nothing. And that's very difficult. I want to tell you a little bit more. Yeah.
The holiday of Hannuka started on 164 BC.
Yes. Well, complicated. Do you really want to know? I'll tell you. But yeah, answer your question.
No, because if we're using things that are of the wedding holiday, their holiday started after the birth of.
So what we were thinking about is Christmas. Yes. I'm saying there was older holidays before Christians, right? Because there was a lot of religions out
They
there.
had older holidays when they were.
So this thing that the rabbis are talking about, the rabbis are living before there's any type of Christmas. They're talking about Kalenda and Saturnalia. That's a very old holiday that they're talking about. And they're saying they used it for bad, we use it for good. They used it for idolatry, we use it l'shem shalom. You understand? Now, Christmas is very interesting. When do they celebrate Christmas? 25th of December. When is January 1st? How many days after the 25th of December? 8 days. It's not, it's 8 days. They took our stuff, okay? They took our stuff. They were Jewish originally, but they took our stuff, okay? But every time we celebrate Christmas, I'm like, enjoy your Hanukkah. What? Well, maybe that was also an old thing. I mean, just so you could see something a little bit interesting, see where it says Maccabees 10:2? See that heading right here in the middle of the page? We don't, on all of our holidays, we read from a book of the Torah, but on Hanukah, we don't read from any book of the Torah. I don't know if you know that. And the reason is because we don't really have a record of the holiday. The only place that we find it is in an external source called Maccabees, okay? Which is not part of our Torah. It's part of other traditions. But that's where we find the historical story. So listen to this story. Now, Maccabeus and his followers, with God leading them on, recovered the temple and the city. They tore down the altars that had been built in the public square by the foreigners, and they destroyed the sacred precincts. So they're cleansing the town. They purified the sanctuary and made another altar of sacrifice. Then, striking fire out of flint, they offered sacrifices. After a lapse of 2 years, they offered incense, and they lighted lamps, and they set out the bread. So what they're saying is, what they were doing, we always only think about the light, but what they were doing, the light was part of all the different things. They made the bread, they were offering sacrifices, and they lifted the menorah. All of these things were in the temple worship, like those were common parts of temple worship. When they had done this, they fell prostrate and implored God that they may never again fall into such misfortunes. but that if they should ever sin, they might be disciplined with him with forbearance and not handed over to blasphemous, barbarous nations. It happened that on the same day on which the sanctuary had been profaned by the foreigners, the purification of the sanctuary took place. That is the 25th day of the month of Kislev. Remember I told you that why did it happen on the 25th? Because the same day that they destroyed it was going to be the day they repurified it. Now listen, this is interesting. They celebrated it for 8 days with rejoicing in the manner of the festival of booths. Does anybody know what that is in Hebrew? What's the festival of booths? We call it Sukkot. Okay? So, we only have one other holiday that's 8 days long, and that holiday is Sukkot. You with me? What they're remembering how not long before, during the festival of Sukkot, they had been wandering in the mountains and caves like wild animals. Therefore, carrying ivy-wreathed wands and beautiful branches and fronds, they set out and made thanksgiving to purify the holy place. Here's what's really interesting. They couldn't celebrate Sukkot that year because they didn't have the temple yet. So when they got the temple back on the 25th of Kislev, they decided to do like a semi-Sukkot festival. Sukkot is 8 days long, so they made it 8 days long. And on Sukkot, you carry around branches and trees, so they carried around branches and trees. Which is why you're wondering why the Christians put trees in their house on this 8-day festival. Probably originated because they don't know that they're celebrating Sukkot because that's when you purify the temple. Okay? Is this messing up with your brain? Okay. It's interesting. It's interesting. And that's actually why we say Hallel. Hannuka, you say a full Hallel all 8 days. The only other time we do that is on Sukkot. Okay? These are just things to keep in your brain. Question?
Yeah, so you mentioned that the story of Hannuka is in like outside stores.
Yes.
So is that when it's not?
Yes. Yes. You want to know more? Listen, what ends up happening, the question really is, why don't we have so many sources for Hannuka? Why do we only know about the light lasting for 8 days, that miracle? Why don't we know all of this stuff that I'm talking about? And the reason is because it's very complicated reasons. But one reason is, do you know the answer?
Well, nobody knows exactly because, but one reason could be that there were not that many Jewish writers during that time.
Well, we have Josephus writing, and he writes about this festival. He doesn't know
He was pretty much
Josephus is a Jewish historian of the time.
Pretty much the only one.
Only one.
There were not that many people who would.
But this is what I want to tell you. This is actually a very sad story. Later on in Jewish history, the Hashmonaim, who were amazing, ended up becoming a corrupt family. And the rabbis sort of had like a complicated relationship with them because they took over the priesthood, and like within 2 generations, they became corrupt. So they sort of didn't want to emphasize their role anymore. And also, later in our history, when we were choosing whether to rebel to a foreign nation or not, the rabbis were very torn. And it's been a question for us throughout, like, do we fight or do we acquiesce? If we fight, what if we get destroyed? Right? If we acquiesce, is it better? And this week's parasha is the story of Yosef, right? And Yosef is a very interesting story because Yosef is going to tell a story about somebody who, what he's going to do is he's going to hide. And he's going to hide inside of a foreign court. And the reason he's going to hide is that one day he's going to be able to save all of his brothers and the Jewish people. But it's complicated, right? It's complicated. When do you say, I'm a Jew? And when do you say, I need to stay hidden until I can protect my people? Yeah. And it's the question that Hannuka raises. And it's also the question of the dreidel, which is spin your dreidels. Maybe you have to do it in secret until we, thank God, we live in America, a place where we can talk about these things openly, right? But that's part of the reasons that we don't have an internal record, because it got very complicated. Other questions?
So they celebrated the Sukkot dedication to 8 days, and then it was just a coincidence of the oil also last week.
So I think what ended up happening is they emphasized, we only have one source that says that the oil lasted for 8 days. There are other sources that say there were 8 staves in the ground, rabbinic sources. So it's complicated. But I think they emphasized the miracle of the light because they wanted to shift the attention of the way we celebrate the holiday to something I'm going to show you later. We're almost done.
But originally it was just some of them were 8 and 8 days
originally it's commemorating Hannuka Tabai. Originally it's commemorating that we got our temple back and that we won the war. And the 8 days probably came from the Sukkot part, yes. And also because there was this ancient holiday that was an 8-day candlelighting festival, okay? Both. And then they layered on the miracle of oil, right? It's layered. What were you going to ask? Oh, you don't want to? Yeah.
So why did you teach us that somewhere in first and second grade? Why did it always learn as a kid 8 days because the jug of oil lasted 8 days?
A lot of people don't know a lot of things. A lot of people don't know a lot of things. No, a lot of people just don't. I'm telling you, I didn't know all this. My husband's a historian, he's a professor of Jewish history, so we developed this class together. That's what they call our married, you know? And I think sometimes people get nervous when we start talking about things intellectually, like they feel like they're going to lose something. But there's nothing, like, I think it's very interesting and exploratory. I feel like it actually shows the grandeur and strength of Jewish identity that we were able to develop this complex holiday. And also, the real question you're asking is, why do we only emphasize the miracle of the light of the evening, right? And I think it's because the rabbis saw that we weren't remembering what really Hanukkah is about, which I'm going to read you now. I'm going to read you what I think Hanukkah is really all about. But during these 8 days, you should really try to focus your mind. Okay? Let's read it together. This is Tehillim, chapter 30. Psalm 30. This we read right after, I don't know, does your community have this, does your community have this tradition that you say this psalm right after you light the candles? Yes. The Ashkenazim don't, but Sfaradim. I don't think the Ashkenazim don't have this tradition. Even though they should, it's awesome song. Alright. What we're going to do is I'm going to read this psalm to you in Hebrew and in English, and I'm going to talk about it. Mizmor Shir Chanukah Habayit L'David. A song of dedication of the house of David. I will praise you, God, because you have raised me up, and you have not let my enemies rejoice over me. God, I cried out to you, and you healed me. God, you took my soul from this thing called Sheol, which is, you took my soul out of the darkest depths of death, right? And you lifted it up. You gave me life from those who wanted to see me buried in the ground. Or from those who throw me into the pit. Anybody know somebody who was just thrown into the pit? And it's interesting that we're reading the story of Yosef at the same time. Zamru Adonai Chasidav. Let us praise God and all of the wonderful things He does. V'hodu l'zecher kasho. And let us remind everyone about His holy name. Ki rega be'akol chayim b'ritzono. Even though we might spend a moment in His anger, but all of our lives are in the bounty of His favor. Be'erev yalim be'achli u'baboker minah. One of the most famous lines of all Tehillim. Weeping will endure the night, but joy cometh in the morning. Va'ani amarti b'shalvi. And I said, when I was secure, when I was feeling good, nothing will ever shake me. God, when I am in your favor, I feel like a street in how. I feel very frightened. God, to you I call. And to God I pray. What profit is there in my blood when I go down into the pit? Does dust know you? Does it declare the truth of your being? Shema Adonai v'chani. Listen, God, and be kind to me. Adonai yeh ozenu. God, please be my helper. Hafachta mitzvedi l'choli. Change my sorrowful song to one of praise and dancing. Patachta saki. Open up my sack, which is right here. Open up my sackcloth, meaning what you wear when you're in mourning, sackcloth and ashes. And return me to gladness, or help me get to gladness, or give me the strength of gladness. L'man yizamrecha kavod v'lo yidom, so that my glory can praise you and not be silent. Adonai Elohai, the olam odela. Oh God, forever I will praise you in your praise. Beautiful. We don't read it up to you, right? So here's what's so interesting to me. First of all, Tehillim, if you notice, is written in singular. Right? One person talking about their own journey and their own self. But somehow that singular experience is about our whole nation as a people and what we experience. But it's one and the same. Remember when I spoke to you about those dark days of winter and we feel cold and alone, right? In Judaism, darkness is not darkness and light is not light. Okay? Darkness is when we feel disconnected from God, we feel very lost, we feel very alone, we feel very frightened. Light is when we say, you know what? I believe that there is a divine person in this world, a divine being in a person. I believe that I am being taken care of. I actually very much believe on the very darkest of days that there is light. And this is part of the very first pasuk of what it means to be a Jew, right? But in the beginning, God created heaven and earth. What's the very first thing that God is going to create? Light. God said, let there be light. And everything is chaotic and dark. And the voice of God is the voice that says, there should be light in this world. And as Jewish people, that's something that we are responsible for understanding and also communicating. Do you notice how the psalmist keeps saying, if I'm not here, who's going to talk about how amazing God is, right? So what we're seeing is that we actually have a responsibility to emphasize God's glory and his grandeur and his role in this world. To explain to people that there's actually something very wonderful and light-filled, beautiful about the world we live in. Which is why we emphasize, most of all, the miracle of the light, right? Because what we're trying to say, what the rabbis really wanted us to understand is, yes, it's about the battle between good and evil. Yes, it's about a small nation who's able to conquer a larger nation. Yes, it's about war and about destruction and about redemption. But if you want to take all of those ideas and understand what it's all about, it's about that there can be light, miraculous light. When you think there can't be light, there can, right? And I think back, right, back to 1948, we always say, like, the Jews just went through the Holocaust. If somebody, my father always says this, he said, if somebody would go to a Jew in the concentration camp and say, guess what? In a few years, it's going to be the state of Israel. What would they say? One day we're going to have our own land again. What? We're being completely destroyed. There is not a chance that we're ever going to have that. And in that moment, it sounds like what it means to be a Jew is to say, in the very darkest pit, right? When things seem like there's no hope, to say, you know what, the light's going to last. Not only is there going to be light, it's going to last longer than you might think it will. Right? It's going to be miraculous. And it's very interesting because this is our national identity. We are supposed to be the light bringers. We're supposed to be, or like a light unto the nations. And on a very personal level, something to think about, which I think about a lot, because I have 4 kids, which means I spend a lot of time being very nervous, being very anxious, being very afraid. And I think about that the Torah wants me to know that those feelings are not the best feelings to always have in mind. That as a Jew, I'm sort of responsible for going into my heart and saying, you think things are very bad, you think things are very dark, but you need to believe that things are going to get better, that there is going to be light. If not that everything's going to be okay, those are 2 different things, right? Not that everything's going to be perfect and okay, but that you are together with God, that he's taking care of you, that he loves you, and that you will survive to some degree or another, maybe in miraculous ways that you never expected. And this week's parasha, Yosef is thrown into a pit by his brothers. And it says, and the pit was empty, there was no water in it. Yosef is about to die. Okay? There is no hope for him. And at the last moment, he's sold into slavery. Like you would think, is that the light at the end of the tunnel? Slavery! Is that a worse fate than death? Right? But he somehow takes that horrible fate, the cards that he was given, those horrible cards, and he translates them into becoming the Prince of Egypt, okay? He translates them into completely saving the entire Jewish nation. He doesn't allow the pit to become everything that he experiences. He lights candles, right? He brings light. So when we're experiencing Hanukah for these 8 days, we're going to think about all of feel the bleeding history of your holiday, right? That once we didn't have a temple, that once our Chag Kislev is when we first built the temple, and people came and tried to destroy it, but then we were able to rededicate it, right? I titled this class with the Israel, From Light to Dark and Back Again, right? That we're always remembering a very complicated history, right? Filled with centuries of experiences and trials and tribulations, but also great redemptive moments, very powerful moments for the Jewish people. And that when we sit around with our family, or sit around with our kids, or wherever you're going to light candles, we can come over a little bit, you know, right? That when we light the candles, we should sing and dance with them. And we should tell them it's dark outside, but it's light in here. Yes? Because we are together, we love each other, and we are people of faith, we believe in Hashem, we believe He will take care of us, and we sing Mizmor Shir Chanukah Habayit L'David. We sing it together. Yes? Notice it's called Mizmor Shir, let us sing a song. And it's such a sad song, really, when you look at the word. You know, he's in a very, very bad place, but he's still able to sing in that bad place. And this is, I think, what it means to celebrate Hanukkah. Right? Questions?
I thought the Dash did have a menorah like this.
It had a menorah, 7, right?
What?
A menorah has 7 branches. This is not a menorah. It's a Hanukah. Okay. Hanukah has 8.
Oh, that.
Oh, good. That's a menorah, a temple menorah, which has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, with one in the middle is the 7th. That is a Hanukah.
Was that the source of light?
That is the source of meat, yes. In Beit HaMikdash, every single day they used to light the menorah.
That's what lasted 8 days.
So that's the question, right? So they were able to light it for 8 days, but that's when you start to say, is it about the menorah, or is it about light itself, right? Or is it about the 8 days of light that they're bringing in? Which is why it's a different type of thing that we light. We call it a Hanukah. We use the shamash, right? We can't use those candles for anything, right? They say you cannot use the Hanukah menorah. We call it a menorah. It's all the same. The menorah, Hanukah candles for anything other than the joy of the festival, right? You're not supposed to read your book by that, and you're not supposed to light the other candles with them because they're not utilitarian, okay? You're not supposed to use them. You're supposed to glory them. You're supposed to just appreciate the grandeur of your holiday. And we put it in our window, right? We show everybody. This happened to us once, and we feel really proud of our experiences and our survival as Jews. Others? Yeah.
I want to thank you.
Okay.
And as you said, today was 18 years ago, my children's father passed away. And if I knew, I wouldn't remember him as born in darkness to light. And that was the story of my life. And my children were the light of my life.
I'm so sorry to hear that. But yes, but there's another side. This time this year, same for us. We lost my sister-in-law. She's 23. And it's very difficult, but it's also, we remember her. And she brought great light to us.
Yes, so like I had kids, and then the week after was